When the monk rang the bell for morning prayers, a damp rattle sounded from the wall of the east wing. The stone beneath his fingers was warm, as if someone were breathing from inside. By noon, something viscous, grey-green, with the sweet smell of rotting entrails, oozed from the crack. That same night, the abbot of the monastery died, old Father Bartolomeo, confessor to 3 popes, and once an advisor to the Inquisition in Naples. His body was not taken to the crypt until dawn. The guards refused to touch him. He was still warm, but his face had turned black, and a thick liquid oozed from his nostrils. Silence fell over the monastery, and the smell began to penetrate the cells. The last 7 weeks before his death were not mentioned in any official report, except for a note from the junior physician tucked between the pages of the visitor's register. The body has been emitting a foul odor since the 3rd week. The sores on his chest have opened, and there are worms inside. He still orders his correspondence to be brought to him and demands wine. But at night, he screams that the walls are whispering. The bell has been rung twice. Contrary to the rules, the servants refuse to enter his chambers. The abbot suffered from an unknown fever that arose suddenly after his return from Rome, where he had attended the trial of a young monk accused of witchcraft. The security report states that on the way back, he stopped eating and complained of tightening skin in the groin and lower abdomen. His body temperature rose, his face turned red, and he began to suffer from insomnia. Even then, he stopped lifting his eyelids when talking. He began to suffer from incontinence, and straw was placed under his bed at night. In the 4th week after his return from Rome, an ulcer opened on his left thigh. Local doctors prescribed leeches and a vinegar and sage rub. The official herbalist at the monastery recommended opium in oil and bandages soaked in the milk of a goat born on Christmas Day. Bartolomeo refused. He ordered that only holy water be brought to him and demanded that Brother Paolo read psalms at his bedside all night. Paolo fled on the 3rd night and was found dead in the chapel, strangled with his own rope from his cassock. The 5th week, a drop in blood pressure, purple spots on the stomach and chest. From the report of the senior servant, he is breathing less and less, his eyes are open, but he is not blinking. He asks to be taken to the council chamber. He has not left there for 2 days. It smells of pus and incense. There are traces on the floor as if someone has been crawling around. The servants claimed that at that time he had ordered the east wing to be locked. The old archives of the Inquisition were kept there, including drafts of interrogations and relics taken from heretics. None of the brothers knew why he wanted this. Since then, 3 monks have disappeared. One of them, Brother Arnaldo, was an apprentice herbalist and had overheard conversations between the abbot and an unknown young priest who had arrived without papers. The 6th week, Bartolomeo stopped getting out of bed, but continued to dictate messages. No one received them. The paper remained blank. The ink dried up. He spoke to the empty air as if someone were there. The monk who was allowed to examine him wrote, "His temperature has dropped sharply. The skin on his stomach is like parchment, with bleeding cracks. There is white discharge from his ears and anus. He asks for something to be removed from him. He points to his side. He says that another person is living inside him. At the same time, his face remains calm." By the evening of the 6th week, a monk who worked under the wall of the east wing heard a scraping sound. Thinking it was mice, he knocked off the plaster. Pus flowed from the crack, and the smell of rotten eggs filled the air. In the morning, a rumor spread through the cells that breathing could be heard coming from the wall. 7th week. No one entered the abbot's chambers anymore. The doctor left for the village without saying goodbye. The archivist, who had been tasked with checking the papers, burned one of the cabinets in the archive. It was too late. When a monk brought the ship's surgeon to perform an autopsy, Bartolomeo was no longer breathing, but his body was warm and his fingers were clenched. From the autopsy report, the ulcers on the chest are open. The abdominal cavity is distended, the skin is tight, but fluid is oozing out. Bubbles were found during the incision. The liver was black with a coating. The heart looked as if it had been torn from the inside. The intestines were partially melted. The pelvic bones were covered with greenery. There was a clear internal purulent process. A septic infection caused by the absorption of blood remaining in the tissues was possible. Upon opening the peritoneum, there is a sharp rattle, gas, and possibly residual diaphragmatic activity. The body was not buried for 3 days. In the evening of the second day, when the sun disappeared behind the cedar alley, a rattle was heard again from a crack in the monastery wall. And in the morning, a stream of thick liquid, like dirty milk mixed with blood. The stone gave way. It was broken out, and behind it was emptiness. No rooms, no stairs, only a rotting hollow in which lay fragments of old manuscripts, bones, and an iron cross without a crucifix. It was officially announced that the abbot's death was caused by internal inflammation of the bile and a curse left by the wicked, according to the wording of the bishop's decree. The entrance to the east wing was ordered to be bricked up. But at night, rustling sounds could still be heard in the corridor. On the 4th day after his death, an attempt was made to embalm the abbot's body. The simple ritual, prescribed by the monastery's rules, involved only rubbing the internal organs with myrrh and incense, and sewing up the openings with rags. However, an autopsy revealed that the abdominal cavity was already completely decomposed. Due to strong internal pressure, the stitches were coming apart and steam was coming out of the seams. A veterinarian from a neighboring village, summoned by the treasurer, called this phenomenon heat rot and refused to touch the remains, saying only, "He is no longer human inside." 2 monks left to guard the body fell ill. One developed a fever, the other stopped speaking. He was carried out of the monastery. Later, a note was made in the parish chronicle. Brother Simone remains silent, does not look into the eyes. He says he saw the abbot moving his fingers and biting his lip. The crypt where they wanted to move the remains was damp, and part of the wall was covered with white mold. Rats ran away from there, as did Brother Piero, who, having climbed down from the incense burner, soon threw himself out of the bell tower window. His last cry was incomprehensible, but the guards noted that he was clutching his stomach and whispering the word "inside." Meanwhile, arguments broke out among the brothers. The older monks insisted that Bartolomeo's death was a sign of punishment for his participation in the Inquisition interrogations. They were particularly reminiscent of the case of a young novice who died in a Neapolitan dungeon after being tortured with cold. Others claimed that he had been poisoned. They mentioned an envoy from Rome who had arrived without a name or seal. No one had seen him since, but the brother archivist's diary contained the following entry. Today, he spoke with the stranger for a long time. Then we did not see him, but the air became like a damp crypt. An official representative of the diocese arrived on the 9th day. He refused to enter the East Wing, and after listening to only half of the report, ordered the abbot's chambers to be sealed. The stone seal was set, but that same night, one of the stones fell out. A smell of rancid fat wafted out from inside. The monks began to mix sandalwood and oak ash into the incense, but the smell did not go away. It penetrated the bread, the water, and even the wine, as evidenced by an entry in the cook's log. On the 12th day, The old bell ringer died in his sleep. Blood, mixed with yellow pus, flowed from his mouth. When his skull was opened, it was found that the inside of the parietal bone was covered with mucus, and the brain tissue had turned pale, as if it were dissolving. From the report, such a condition was observed only in those who had spent a long time in rotten crypts, but he never left the tower. The air must have penetrated there on its own. The Council of Brothers decided to open the hiding place behind the wall where the wheezing was first heard. The masons refused. Then, 4 young novices took up the work. After 3 hours of hard work, a stone compartment opened, behind which there was indeed a small, dilapidated cell. There were 2 urns, fragments of bones, and a wooden box wrapped in leather. On the leather was an inscription, burned, not written in ink. Inside is not silent. Do not open. The box was opened anyway. Inside was a dried-up scroll, several teeth, fragments of something resembling intertwined entrails, and a copper key. The scroll was on faded parchment, but several phrases could be made out. It burst out of him. It's not him screaming. The cross is turned inside out. After the cell was opened, the illnesses worsened. 3 brothers developed purulent abscesses on their necks. 1 died in a terrible fever, leaving only black spots on the sheet. His remains were not buried in time. They spread out. The novice who washed the bed later confessed in confession that he heard the linen hissing as if a snake was moving inside. By the end of the 2nd week, after the abbot's death, the monastery was almost empty. Only 7 brothers remained, locked in the refectory. They burned sacred books and refused to open the doors. One of them, Brother Augusto, kept a diary. The last entry reads, "He did not leave. We were wrong. He is now within these walls. He is listening to us breathe. We must not speak loudly. Today, something white dripped from under the icon." 20 days after Bartolomeo's death, the bishop sent a special squad of 3 secular doctors, 1 diocesan minister, and 4 guards to the monastery. All of them disappeared. All that is known is that one of the horses returned without a rider, with the saddle gnawed off. At the gates of the monastery, they found the cap of one of the doctors, containing a crumpled piece of paper with a single line, "He is now deaf, but he can hear through walls." Later, at the request of the Roman Curia, the monastery was officially closed. Local masons bricked up the entrance and filled in the windows. According to legend, the last sound they heard when the arch was being built was a groan, similar to that of a dead man when he is turned face down on the ground. The monastery remained closed for 7 years. The prefect's reports indicated that during this time, not a single pilgrim approached the gates. Local peasants avoided the hill, claiming that quiet singing could be heard from the upper windows at night. Sometimes steam rose from the abandoned bell tower and settled on the grass in an oily yellow film, causing it to blacken and rot. The 8th year after the monastery was sealed was marked by crop failure and a strange livestock die-off. 11 cows fell within 4 days, and when the veterinarian examined the carcasses, he said their hooves were rotten, as if they had been standing in manure for weeks. But the shepherds insisted that the herd had been in the field. At the insistence of the local elder, they again appealed to the diocese. This time, the response came 6 weeks later. "Do not disturb what has been sealed. It has been secured by prayer. Any interference is a sin." In the 11th year, it was decided to investigate the monastery. The archbishop of the diocese was replaced, and the new prelate, wishing to show his determination, sent a delegation of 9 people, including 2 scientists, inside. The records have been preserved in the archives of St. Jerome. One of the chroniclers, Brother Emilio, wrote, We entered through a breach in the south wall. The smell was indescribable. It was neither rot nor death. Most of all, it was as if water had been rotting in the head for many years. The steps were damp. Some were covered with black dust, like burnt hair. One of the doctors, I think his name was Jules, tore the veil from the window and immediately cried out. There was a handprint on the glass, the inside of a hand, but not a human hand. The fingers were too thin. 3 bodies remained in the dining room. They were sitting at the table as if they had died there. Their skulls were missing their jaws, and their hands were clasped together. On the wall behind them were words scratched with bones. He didn't leave. They had clearly been written in a hurry. The letters were uneven, and in one place, a claw had broken through the lime. A thick liquid dripped from the crack under the letter Z, resembling honey but smelling of vinegar and rotten shells. Further down the corridor, the delegation came across an altar room. There in the center lay a body, probably that of Augusto's brother. It was wrapped in faded pages of scripture, between which skin was visible. The eyes were missing, the mouth was sewn shut, but a rolled-up scroll protruded from under the lips. They did not have time to pull it out. When they tried to touch it, the paper fell apart, and the lips seemed to press down harder. One of the escorts lost consciousness and was later declared mute. Only 5 participants were able to leave. The rest disappeared inside. One was found later in the basement, standing in a corner with his head touching the ceiling. There were burn marks on his forehead. He was breathing but did not recognize anyone. He died 3 days later, covered in pus-filled spots. According to the doctor's description, the flesh fell away from the bones at the slightest movement. The veins burst. There was no blood. The Archbishop ordered the entrance to be walled up again. But by that time, rumors had already spread. People said that the monastery was a trap, that the shadow of the abbot remained inside, not released by heaven. The nearest villages were deserted. Only old people remained in the village of La Porta. One of the women, Domenica, testified, "At night, we hear something scraping under the ground. Sometimes the water in the well pulsates like a heart. One boy looked in there and didn't eat anything for 2 days, just moaned." Meanwhile, a change of power was taking place in the diocese. The old investigation documents disappeared, and the newly appointed officials made no mention of the monastery. But the reports of the secret archives of St. Mary note, "The case of the rotting body has been reopened. One of the witnesses died with his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, as if from the inside. On his tongue were the words, 'I saw a body come out of the wall, but it was not a human being.'" A final attempt was made. 15 years after Bartolomeo's death, a group of exorcists and executioners, armed with censers and chains, entered the monastery. No one returned from this expedition. Only one chain, rusty and covered with slime, was found in front of the monastery gates, and on it, as noted in the report, hung a plaque carved from a human shoulder blade. "He is no longer in the flesh. He is in stone. He hears and waits." After the disappearance of the last expedition, the diocese finally abandoned all attempts to open the monastery. An internal order found among the papers of the archives of St. Lucia read, "Any mention of Brother Bartolomeo is to be considered a theological error. The area is to be declared unclean. The entrances are to be walled up according to the rite of the Silent Ones. Witnesses are to be released after confession. The records are to be burned." However, 2 years later, a man reappeared at the monastery. His name was Raphael Conte. He was a former military doctor, then a priest who had been exiled for supporting reformist views. He arrived alone, with a rusty cart carrying glass jars, books, and a leather bag with tools. The locals wrote, he was silent. He did not cross himself. He said he had come not to save, but to verify. Raphael spent 2 days inside. On the third day, he was found at the foot of the monastery wall, alive, but badly burned. His lips were torn, his palms covered with sores. He refused food, but in his delirium, he said, "He is not dead. He has absorbed himself. In the breath of the stone, in the dust, he became time." 6 days later, he died. According to the doctor, his spleen was swollen, his lungs were half filled with black fluid, and his tongue was cut, as if he had tried to swallow it. Raphael's death mask was banned from public display. Later, a single note was found in his bag. Its contents are kept in the archives under the heading, "Not for distribution among seminarians." The smell of pus begins where prayer stops. I found the remains of the abbot's body. It is not decaying. It is not holy. It is pushing against the walls from within. Its decay is a rhythm. And if I had stayed there another day, that rhythm would have become my heart. At the same time, anomalies began to occur in neighboring villages. In La Porta, all the babies born in the fall died. They all had sores on the back of their heads and blood in their urine. A letter from the priest Juan de Rosa, dated the same year, says, "The old people are silent. The young are running away. At night, a tremor comes from the monastery, across the ground, like a bell, but it does not ring. We tried to burn for branches at the gate. The smoke went inside. Even the wind did not change its direction. The papal ambassador sent to investigate disappeared. His porters were found 2 days later, one drowned in a puddle of sewage, the other hanged himself with the strap he had used to carry the charter. A note hung from his mouth. The walls have ears. It's too late." Panic broke out inside the Vatican. The secret college ordered the seizure of all documents relating to the monastery. Dozens of library reference books were destroyed. Even paintings depicting the abbot disappeared. They were listed in the inventory, but now only blank fragments of wall remained in their place. Nevertheless, rumors continued to grow. Pilgrims passing by described how, 4 hours after leaving the monastery, they began to experience headaches. 6 hours later, they heard footsteps, and 8 hours later, steam rose from under their feet. One of them, Antonio Mecchi, later became disabled. "I felt something enter my leg. It was crawling. I screamed, but it moved upward. Now it is black. I have no feeling in it." In late autumn, a group of peasants, encouraged by a wandering hermit, attempted to destroy the western wall of the monastery. They managed to remove 5 stones. One of the participants, Angelo Trabucco, recounted, "When the 5th stone came away, the wall groaned. It didn't creak. It groaned, wet and deep, as if the whole monastery were a rib cage." 2 days later, 3 of the participants were dead. Their bodies were found in their homes. No signs of violence, but their eyes were rolled back. Their pupils had disappeared. Instead, there were small cracks like spider webs. The landlady described it. Their faces were calm, but pus was flowing from their ears like candles. No smell, no color, but if it touched the floor darkened. By the beginning of the next year, all roads to the monastery were blocked, but monks from the neighboring abbey of St. Agatha reported that every evening at exactly 9 o'clock, a cough could be heard coming from the west. The same cough, the same hoarse sound. Once it repeated 7 times, and that night, one of the brothers died. A thread was found in his throat. They pulled it out, and it was 8 cubits long. It was covered with drops of pus that did not absorb into water or oil. Pus was oozing from the walls, and it continued to ooze despite the winter. The following spring, a letter written on rough leather arrived in Rome. It was delivered by a shepherd who could not read. The letter said, "It is still breathing. We sealed the cracks with iron. It melted. We boarded up the windows with lead. It turned black. We placed scarecrows around it, turning their faces to the wall. But now the scarecrows are crying. At night, their jaws move. We burned the library, but steam rises from the ashes. In it are names." On the third day after the letter was received in Rome, an event occurred that later chronicles called the sign of the extinct stone. The crack in the marble pedestal of John the Cross widened twice overnight. The stone turned black. The guards at the Trinity Gate reported a sour smell coming from the ground, and traces of decay were found in the underground chapel, even though the bodies had been removed half a century earlier. Several bishops convened a secret meeting. Among them was an old archdeacon from Avignon, who had once been a novice in that very monastery. His words were recorded in Cardinal Orsini's personal notebook. He died in sin, but the sin was not his. He was forced to do it. He was not locked up in the monastery, he was locked up inside himself. And now, he is seeping out, through the stone, through the pus, through us. It was decided to perform a ritual of isolation, a procedure used in extreme cases when a church becomes a repository for the unholy. According to legend, such a ritual had been used only once before, during the expulsion of a missing relic from Segovia, where the floor collapsed after the fifth Mass. But this time, the ritual did not take place. The priest who was preparing the altar died. He was found lying on his stomach, with his mouth open and a piece of wall sticking out of it. After that, the monastery was declared a dead place. It was removed from all maps, even from internal church diagrams. In its place, they put up a sign that said, "Empty wasteland." All documents, including paintings, monastery statutes, personal notes of abbots, and correspondence, were burned. But the monastery remained, and it continued to rot. The stone cracked. According to shepherds at dusk, a light could be seen between the cracks, not golden, not white, but a dull yellow, like oil left in a lamp for too long. Two travelers on their way to Toledo described it in their travel notes. "We stopped by the river. At midnight, we saw fog rising up toward the hill. It wasn't thick, but everything in it seemed distorted. It was as if time was stretching. Then we heard coughing. The same cough, 7 times. At first, we thought it was an old man. Then we realized the cough was coming from underground. We ran away. The next morning, our horse's eyes were running." 20 years have passed. The monastery stones are now crumbling into dust. But, as written in the latest report from the Diocesan Observer, this dust does not settle. It is not in the wind, but it sticks to the skin. It cannot be washed off. And if you breathe it in for too long, you start coughing at night. At first quietly, then with blood, then with black mucus, then the walls crack, even in the house where you sleep. It is believed that the abbot's remains no longer exist. But in the monastery wall, at the bottom of the western corridor, pus is still oozing. It seeps unevenly, sometimes in a trickle, sometimes pulsating, as if something is still beating inside. The last pilgrim who dared to approach it described it as follows. "It seemed to me that the wall was breathing, not in the literal sense, but as if someone was still inside, not alive, not dead, but someone who has not been let go. He does not ask for anything. He punishes, slowly, through decay, through every crack." Thus ended the story of Abbot Bartolomeo, but the monastery remained, and with each passing year, more moisture seeps into the cracks in its walls.